there's a lot of disingenuous content in terms of like ghost cities and that kind of stuff. You have to remember that when China builds new constructions, when they build new residential areas, things like that, it's not like the West, it's not like Australia and the US where you can just build like a few buildings in Australia and it will have an impact on the rental market or whatever. In China, it doesn't work like that. There's just too many people here. So when they build new residential communities, they tend to build 20 buildings, 30 buildings, like you're talking tens of thousands of apartments. And so, like there's a famous one, I think it's in Hangzhou that I'm going to go and visit. There's 40,000 people living in one like apartment complex area, like a sort of joint tower project. Like there's nothing like that in the West. There's nothing even close to that. And so you got to remember when they're building those kind of projects, there's going to be periods of time where if you go there and you film it, it looks like nobody lives there. Do you know what I mean? Like you can walk around and be like, oh, there's no people here. It's like a ghost town. But what those people never do, those kind of disingenuous creators, content creators, is they never go back like 2 years later or 3 years later when there's millions of people living there. Now, is there projects in China that never really fill out and never become successful and become kind of problems? Yeah, sure. You know, this exists in every country. Something that's very strange too that I notice Western audiences do is they kind of act like or perceive that like the Chinese government's responsible for everything, which is bizarre when you consider that the CPC essentially is only 100 people. You know, the 100-member committee or whatever, which is who's really in charge of everything from the top. You know, they don't control every little thing that happens. There's still businesses, construction companies, development companies, and they still choose to do what they want. You know, they still build facilities and build shopping malls that don't become successful. You know, build entire residential communities that don't really fill out and become kind of, you know, what you would classify as a kind of ghost city, etc. You think about all of the interesting things going on in China every second, all of the development, all of the construction, all of the stuff happening. You know, the government just can't look at everything. They can't make everything successful or check that everything's going to be done right. It's the same with every country. There's a limit to how much you can do in a day. And yeah, you could say like local provincial governments and those kind of people need to do a better job with future planning too. Yeah, there's an element of that. But at the same time, like, there's also a kind of unknown. Like if a giant construction company like Greenland Group and these kind of companies, if they want to build huge facilities and huge places with lots of towers, and then they end up not doing well and they become a problem or whatever, well, that's just the reality of business. You know, like the Chinese government's not responsible for that, so Western audiences do this weird thing where they perceive that like everything that happens in China is because of the Chinese government or somehow it's their fault or something. Like, if you spent time here or you were just logical for a moment, you would realize that that's crazy. You know, China's got 1.4 billion people. There's incredible amount of development and infrastructure and things going on every day. You can't be responsible for every poor choice that a development company makes, things like that. You know, I think the only areas that you could criticize the government for in terms of development is like infrastructure because it's all state-owned here. So roads, for example, high-speed rail, metro, you know, bridges, things like that. If things like that aren't done well, then yeah, you have a legitimate position to criticize the government because it's all state-owned. Same with, in general, banking, you know, telecommunications, things like that. So if you have any problems, sure, you know, you criticize the efficiency of the government, the incompetence or whatever. But other than that, you know, the government's not responsible for whether Muji does well. You know what I mean? Like if Muji decides to put a store here and nobody buys anything here and it doesn't go well, that's not the fault of the Chinese government. That's just bad planning by Muji. You know, so don't be putting ridiculous standards on the Chinese government that you don't even put on your own government. So